Welcome, friends and future financial failures. Today, I'm going to teach you the surefire way to live in a constant state of unintentional misery. Why pour your heart and soul into being financially fulfilled and successful when being miserable is just so much easier? You barely even have to do anything, right? So, as a certified financial planner who's dealt with hundreds of families' finances and been incredibly introspective about my own for over a decade, I've condensed the most powerful, crystallized list of different ways to guarantee anyone, even you, in this economy, can attain financial misery today in 6 easy steps. So let's dive in. And by the way, I'm not just some huckster selling my online course on how to be miserable. I've been miserable myself. Over time, I have learned the tried and true ways of misery. So I'm not just another guy out there teaching you how to be miserable. I'm someone who's lived it. And so you can learn from me, okay? Step number 1. Try to shoulder your way into social classes that you don't deserve to be in or that you weren't born in. The reality is that we are social animals, right? There is no denying that our society splits itself up into different socioeconomic classes. And these classes have different amounts of resources, they have different hobbies, they have different tastes, they have different politics. But most of us have a natural desire to ascend that class ladder. We'd like to know that we're making progress economically, socially, and whether we know it or not, sometimes it's in the very back of our animal brain. But the best illustration I've ever seen to really explain how this works in the modern era in the Western world is this visual I saw from Nick Bardini from Spearhead Advisors. And it looks like this. And by the way, I'm not talking here about what should be. I'm talking about what is, okay? And I'm also not talking about from a perspective of human value or ethics or morality. I'm just talking about economics and social class, okay? That's all I'm talking about here. And it's not my idea, but this is the way it goes, and I think it's really beautiful. So what we have at the very bottom is the underclass, right? Economically speaking, these are the people who are homeless or live on social welfare. They do not produce enough to be self-sustaining. Now, above that, we have the working class, people who are able to get a job, but they are not really able to save enough to become free from that job. And then we move up one, which is the middle class, people who have maybe slightly more comfortable jobs doing less laborious things. And over time, maybe they have the ability, along with government pension that they pay into, to maybe have an employer pension of some sort of savings that would allow them to potentially retire at 65 or 70 one day. They don't have to work their whole life. And then this is where there's a break. There's two separate silos where we have the institutional class and the independent class. It breaks off. And this is really interesting to kind of help understand how social class works in the Western world today. On the left-hand side, we break from middle class into the institutional professional class. This left silo is kind of like the institutional silo. Now, this silo of the social class structure is about playing by the rules of the structure that you're in, whether it's working for a Fortune 500 company and making your way up the ladder, whether it's working in politics and making your way up the ladder. What really characterizes this institutional or Ivy League class is the idea that you are playing by a game that is already there and you are fitting into their politics, you are fitting into their structures, and you're trying to ascend in their system. And so it goes from the institutional professional class up to the Ivy League class, right? One step higher than being at a Fortune 500 company is being at a Fortune 500 company with a degree from Yale or Princeton, right? So having that Ivy League kind of persona or that idea, and if you do your best to move up through Goldman Sachs or through JP Morgan or through one of the big consulting companies, maybe one day you can become establishment elite and you can be invited to the Hamptons and the gated communities and this old money style of social class. On the other side, we have the independent professional class. That's people who maybe go out on their own and create their own hierarchy. Maybe over time they become a successful business owner where they're not really playing by the rules of the societal game, but they are nevertheless becoming successful business owners where they could leave their business and it could run itself. And lastly, you get to the counter elite, which is the elites of our society who are outside of the traditional establishment, old money values and system. And that might be someone like a Joe Rogan or an Elon Musk, where people on the establishment elite would be like, long-standing politicians, old money from multi-generations, people who went to the best schools and then went to Harvard and then went to Goldman Sachs and then, all those sorts of things. But what we're really talking about here today is how can we become miserable? What is the guaranteed ways to become miserable financially? Now, the reason this is such a great method for becoming more miserable is that you are taking all of these resources, this energy, this money, and you are taking the power to use that on something that would truly fulfill you and bring you meaning. And you are now outsourcing all of your fulfillment and satisfaction to the approval of somebody else. So now you are no longer in control of whether you can be fulfilled or not, and you are leaving it up to someone else's conclusion about you. And you can spend more, you can put more energy in, you can go to all these sorts of events, and hopefully you can find your way, and hopefully you can find that approval of that people in the social ladder higher than you. And what you'll find is it's like shoveling money and energy and resources into a fire, right? The more you put in, the larger it gets. The bigger that desire burns for more approval, because you feed it and it doesn't go out, and then you feed it again and it doesn't go out. It just gets bigger and bigger. So this is just an incredible way to be financially and socially miserable. Step 2, compare your finances to other people's. If you want to be miserable, you need to focus on where you stand relative to other people so that you delude yourself into believing, like everyone does, that happiness will come from the scoreboard of absolutes, right? What do I mean? If I have X and someone has 10X, that means their life is 10X better. Absolute comparison, right? They're happier, they're 10 times happier, and they will be 10 times more satisfied on their deathbed because they have that much more. And as many philosophers have agreed, and we all know deep down, the reality is that happiness is found in positive trajectory, right? And positive trajectory alone, period, end of story. The observation of forward movement towards a worthy goal, that's happiness. If I have X, right, but I'm observing evidence every day that I'm on track for 2X next year, I'm going to be way happier and way more satisfied than someone who has 10X but is observing daily evidence that they're moving towards 9X next year, right? It's the trajectory that matters. So if we want to be miserable, right, we're trying to be miserable here, we need to make sure that we're deluding ourselves, like everyone's default, into believing that absolute position relative to other people rather than our trajectory is what makes us fulfilled. And bonus points, if you can make sure that the goal you're working towards is one that is set by society or a social caste above you, rather than one that you've genuinely and authentically set for yourself. Step 3, spend more than you make. Now, this may seem cliche. I would like to draw something for you. All right, so here is time and money. And here is how much you make, and this might rise a little bit over time. Hopefully it does, right? And here is how much you could spend. You could choose to spend this amount, or you could choose to spend something like this amount. You could choose to spend less than you make, or you can choose to spend more than you make. And spending more than you make is a lot easier than spending less than you make. That's the great thing about misery, is it's just so simple with these 6 easy steps. There's barely anything we really have to do. But one thing that is incredibly important for us to grasp in this chase for misery is that this down here is the opposite of what we want. This is happiness. And it almost has no bounds. The lower our expenses are beneath our income, the happier we are going to be. It's a direct correlation. And up here, this, when we spend more than we earn, that is misery. And so if we want to achieve this life of financial misery, we want to make sure that we are always in a state of having expenses that are larger than our income. Let's be clear. This gap down here is happiness, and this gap up here is misery. And so the bigger we can make this gap, the more miserable we can be. Now, as cliche as this might seem, it really does go one step deeper, right? The excess or the shortfall has to go somewhere, right? It doesn't just disappear into the ether. Excess, where we have more money than we spend, that usually gets saved. And maybe it's even prudently invested where it can compound and grow. And shortfalls, on the other hand, go towards debt. If we spent more than we earned, money had to come from somewhere. It likely came from debt, whether it's credit cards or consumer debt. That had to come from somewhere. But now here's the really interesting thing. Our decision to spend more than we make doesn't just provide misery now, it provides misery in the future. Because what happens is, if we have two scenarios, one where we save and we spend less than we make, we will over time have this compounding chart up and to the right where our money is compounding and growing for us. And if we just continue to spend more than we make, we're going to have a debt spiral that looks like this. And so excess cash flow creates a nest egg that can grow and compound and create more income and security and anti-fragility in the future. Whereas a shortfall creates debt that can grow and compound as well and make us more and more miserable in the future. This one up here pays future you more and more every year, whereas this one requires future you to work and pay for past fun that you've already had. And so one of the wealthiest people I know was recently telling me how much joy, right? Disgusting, joy, they find for this exact reason. Not only does saving allow you to derive fulfillment from the virtue of prudence and frugality in the present, it also allows you to earn more spending power and security in the future. It's this double whammy, right? Saving is a double whammy of happiness. So we have to make sure that in order to be miserable twice over, we spend more than we make and we allow that to accumulate over a long period of time, like consuming more bad calories than you burn and letting the visceral fat just eat you up from the inside out. If we want to be miserable, we just got to spend a little bit more than we make and do it for a long period of time. Step 4, hold off on investing, especially if the timing just isn't right. Let's take a time frame that we can all understand. Maybe the height of the COVID pandemic until right now, which was the last time that timing certainly didn't seem right. Believe it or not, that was almost 5 years ago. Let's use March of 2020 for dramatic effect, right? If you had a $100,000 nest egg and you decided to invest it in March of 2020, you would now have approximately $256,000 if you put it in the S&P 500 or a basket of American stocks. If you had left that $100,000 right where it was in cash, it would be worth approximately $82,000 today thanks to inflation. So if we want to stay miserable, we need to make sure that we're not investing and we keep all of our savings in cash so that inflation can eat away at all of our hard-earned money and we can grow more and more resentful towards the responsible people among us who decided to invest. And bonus points if your excuse for not getting started is some half-baked theory about the upcoming apocalypse or the market crash Tony Robbins and Robert Kiyosaki have been talking about to sell you books and investment products. Step 5, get a spouse or partner with opposing goals and never talk about them. If I had to define the venue, the Mecca, the Super Bowl of misery, it's probably divorce court, right? Like that makes sense. It's almost cliche at this point to mention there are massive correlations between the quality of marriage and overall life satisfaction. And it's also cliche to add to this, the two leading causes of divorce are infidelity and money. So if we want to be financially miserable, we need to make sure that we use money to drive a wedge between ourselves and our spouses. Now, the best way I can think of to do this is probably by having conflicting values and priorities about what the use of money is, what it's for, what it's working towards, how it should be used, what values and priorities it should facilitate, and then never talking about it. Now, preferably you can even do it in a way where secrets are kept from each other and it creates such a divide between you and your spouse that you cheat on each other. That's when we've really maximized misery for ourselves and our kids too. So that's a huge bonus. Now, last and certainly not least, step 6, believe that money and capitalism are evil. If you can really convince yourself that all money is tainted, all private property is stolen, and that anyone who wants financial success is morally bankrupt, this mindset ensures that you'll never have to save, invest, or work towards financial freedom because that would make you a really bad person, right? And happy people tend to believe that our society and our economy are dominated by win-win transactions where people provide for each other and trade with one another in order to have a net increase in value. They believe that in order to be more successful, you have to be of more benefit to someone else. Like, wouldn't that be fulfilling? Wouldn't that be fantastic? It would be. It's a total disaster. So to be miserable, we need to eat up the radical narratives that we're screwing each other over. Any financial gain is oppressing the less fortunate, and we are just simply burning the environment purely to get richer, and it has nothing at all to do with alleviating suffering for others and our families. And so there you have it, 6 simple steps to financial misery. And if you follow these religiously, you'll be broke and stressed and miserable in no time. And remember, it's not about having money, it's about making terrible decisions with the money that you have. And on one final note, if you're crazy enough to actually want fulfillment and satisfaction in your life and with your money, you could always just invert these strategies and do the opposite. But that's a lot of work.